In Chapter 23, we are going to learn about imperatives and optatives. The imperative and the optative are two additional moods, right? So far you have learned the indicative mood. We spent a lot of time learning indicative moods. The indicative mood is where the speaker or writer is presenting something as a fact, right? Whether they could be lying to us, right? The devil speaks in the indicative mood, but the presentation is that they're presenting something as a fact. The subjunctive mood that we learned is where there's some element of indefiniteness often, like leaving open when it will happen or who will do it. It's also used in just certain constructions where there is no element of indefiniteness. For example, emphatic negation, ou may, is followed by the subjunctive. So there are certain constructions that demand the subjunctive, and then I estimate maybe 70% of those constructions have some element of indefiniteness in them. The imperative, when I say imperative, most of you think what? Most of you think command, and the imperative is used to command, but it's also used to request, right? The command is the mood used in prayers, and it's not a command, it's a request. And the optative is the rarest of the moods in the New Testament, occurring only 68 times, and it's falling out of usage in the Koine period. It's often used to express a strong wish, a strong desire. It has kind of a archaic liturgical type sound to it. It can also be used as a curse. So we'll be having fun in this chapter with imperatives and optatives. Here I have pasted in a text from Matthew chapter 6, verses 9 through 13 of the ESV, and we see all of these imperatives, first bold in English, and then you can see in parentheses how the underlying Greek is represented there. And all of these are imperatives, except this form here I'm circling in red that's a subjunctive functioning as an imperative. And you'll find out by the end of this chapter, by the time you've studied it hopefully, that all of these are aorist imperatives. And until you dive into the imperative deeper, that could be a little bit confusing for you. But one thing you're going to find out is there's an extremely strong preference for the aorist tense of the imperative in prayers. I don't really know why that is. It's just maybe a genre preference that maybe even the original speakers were not consciously thinking about. But when you come to prayers in the New Testament, there's a very strong preference for the aorist tense of the imperative. When there's these other patterns like this, if the verb is inherently atelic, right? If a verb is inherently kind of open-ended, where it doesn't have a natural terminus, like something like walking or going, verbs that have that inherent procedural nature of open-endedness have a strong preference for the present imperative, right? While verbs that have a more natural terminus, a more natural end, have a strong preference for the aorist imperative. We also see a pattern. Again, these are just patterns, and they're patterns that have exceptions. But we see as a pattern, if someone is commanding a general practice, like Jesus says, do not judge lest you be judged, a general practice, don't go around judging people. Generally, those are found in the present imperative, right? Now, they're more frequently found in the present imperative. There's numerous factors that come into play here, as are discussed helpfully in this chapter. There's also commands that we give sometimes for discrete occasions, right? A particular or discrete occasion where we say, hey, do this right now. Jesus says, go wash in the pool of Siloam to the man who had been born blind in John chapter 9. And that's an aorist imperative because it's a specific discrete occasion. So we see these kind of patterns, right? Well, we first off, we have to be able to recognize the forms of the imperative. And I've found over the years that students respond well to building it up from scratch. So I say, let's go back to the oldest thing you know with verbs. Let's go back to the present active indicative. Yes, let's go back to the present active indicative. Yes, I know I'm getting old, but I know we're in the chapter on imperatives, but let's do the indicative. And people like this because it feels comfortable we're reviewing something. And look at this. Things look familiar. We have singular, we have plural, we have first, second, third person. No problem. Let's do this. All right, let's write our forms. So we have luo, luace, lua, luamen, lueta, luusen, right? And so this is a good chance to review this right now. Think about these. Okay, so that's just the present active indicative. Now let's imagine for a moment I want to morph this and I want to make it into an imperative. Okay, I want to make it into the present active imperative, right? Present active imperative. What do? Well, you don't really have a first person imperative. So I mean, if you're talking to yourself, I guess you'd speak to yourself in the second person. So when we think of the imperative, especially in English, we especially think of the second person. And what we're going to do, we're going to start with this form right here. We always start with the second person plural. And we're going to take this luet and we're going to put it down here. Greek has third person imperatives. We'll find out. Luet, right? All we did, I want to circle it in red so we can kind of see it's that same piece. And then we add, let's choose a different color here, we add O and osan. And this initial form here, you really just have to memorize. It's the second person singular. So the present active imperative, now we have the imperative. The present active imperative forms are these four forms. Lue, lueta, lueto, luetosan. We're going to see that pattern repeated over and over again in a moment. But here it is. Look at this. This is written out. Wouldn't it be nice if I could handwrite this neatly? So you see that lue, lueta, lueto, luetosan. Those are the endings you would add on other verbs to communicate the present imperative. Notice here, for the second person, you're addressing one other singular person. Hey, you, loose this. Notice the gloss is also given be loosing, because the idea is, really, when it comes to the imperative, you have two choices. Essentially, you have a present or an aorist, and the present is some element of progressivity or open-endedness or general practice, and the aorist is a discrete occasion or looking at the action as a whole, an action with a natural end to it. You can look in the textbook for a very helpful discussion of those different nuances. But we're trying, giving this possible gloss of be loosing, we're trying to remind you, hey, this is the present imperative, and the author has made a choice. It could have been determined by genre, it could have been determined by the very meaning of the verb he's using, but he made a choice, maybe not even conscious, but the choice to put the verb in the present imperative rather than the aorist. Of course, there are a few verbs that only occur in one tense or the other, and in that sense, the author would not be making a choice for those, right? So, this first form, luez, is a singular person being addressed, and let's imagine. I tell students, I usually tell the same silly story. I say, imagine that I come in class. I'm like, hey, Dan, your wife told me that you're going to bed with your shoes on. This cannot be happening. You're creating a lot of marital disharmony in your home. Hey, Dan, luez. Be loosing your shoes. Don't take them off at night. That's what you need to be doing. Then it starts catching on. Dan and Jim and Stan and everybody else. I'm like, guys, I come in. Luetta, stop doing this. You need to be untying your shoes at night. Take them off. Don't do that, right? Notice how I'm giving a general practice here for the present imperative, which it often communicates. Now, the third person imperative is a little strange to people. They're not used to thinking about a third person imperative, and it's a way of sort of setting someone up and saying, if this is you, you must do this. It is an imperative. Jesus said, if anyone will come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. That means, hey, if you're the kind of person who's going to follow me, you deny yourself, take up your cross and follow me. It is a command, but it's traditionally translated in English translations as let him or let them, which I think can confuse students. They think of it as permission. It's not permission. It's a command. It's must do this. And so I think sometimes the New Living Translation will even change it to a second person addressing the person directly to show how it's a command. So let him loose, meaning, hey, if this is you, you must loose, or let them loose. Now let's continue building, right? We're showing how we can build the imperatives. So let's build the aorist. Well, no, let's go ahead and finish the present. Let's do the present middle passive imperative. And notice, just like with the indicative, we got to start with the indicative, right? Because we're going to do the same thing. We're going to morph it. And we're going to see, just like the indicative, there's a middle/passive for the imperative. So this is walking down memory lane here. We're showing that we do remember our indicative verb forms, right? Singular, plural, first, second, third person. And we can fill this out. You're like, oh yeah, the story of the guy with the tie. I love this one, right? Luamai, Lu-a, Luatai, Luamatha, Luestha, Luantai. No problem, right? That is the indicative. You're like, so what do you want me to do now? I want you to turn this into the imperative. How are we going to do that? Well, you say, I remember you said let's strike out this first line, and then we started with the second person plural, and we said it's the same. Oh, is it the same here too? Yeah, it is. And then what do? Remember, you yank this off and you put it down here. It's exactly the same pattern. Luest. We'll circle it to show that we did that. And then we want the circle to be close so we could write up next to it there. Luest. Then we'll add Osan, exactly what we did before. Let's just glance back, right? We see how we started with that form, and then we added Osan, exactly the same pattern here. And this initial form you just have to memorize. Lu'u. You're like, can you show me that a little bit neater? Glad you asked. Here it is. Lu'u, lu'estha. Remember, this form here is ambiguous. Without any further context, that means either y'all are being loosed or hey, be loosed, right? Right? You're like, what kind of context could we have? Well, if it's negated with may, then that's non-indicative. So don't be loosed, right? So context will make clear whether it's an indicative or imperative. Then we have luestho, let him be loosed, and luesthosan, let them be loosed. And again, this is as a present imperative. It's usually presenting the action in progress or unfolding, a general practice, perhaps an autotelic verb, a verb describing activity that's more unbounded. And this is only giving you the passive translation, right? The middle translation would be loose for yourself, y'all loose for yourselves, let him loose for himself, let them loose for themselves. Okay? All right, let's continue building. And I think we should build the aorist, don't you? Okay, so let's make our little chart here. You know how to do this now, right? Singular, plural. And we're going to write up here. Let's clear this off. We're going to start by writing out the aorist active indicative, right? So writing out the aorist active indicative. We're going to do the indicative first, right? We start with the indicative, and then we morph it into the imperative. So this is a good chance to review, right? We have elusa, elusas, elusen. Do you remember those halcyon days when all you had was the indicative? You didn't know how good you had it, did you? You know how easy life was. It's sort of like people who haven't had kids yet, you know? They're like, oh, we're so busy. You're like, no, you're not busy. You don't know what busy is. You can't handle the truth. All right. All right, here we go. Elusa, elusas, elusen, elusam, and elusata, elusan. There it goes. What are we going to do to morph this now? Boom, boom. What are we going to do to change it into the imperative, to transform it? Well, you say, let's strike out the first person there. I guess I should write second and third person, remind us. And then you say, okay, I'm going to erase these. And then, so is that the imperative form? Well, close. One more thing we have to do here. What do you think? Let me try to give you a little hint here. Yes, that's right. We remove the augment. Why is that? Because augment means past time. You can't command something in the past. Right? So we're keeping the simple presentation of the action, but the objectivity of the the augment there, the past time objectivity, is gone, right? Imperatives refer to things that haven't happened yet. So what do you think we're going to do now? Yeah, take that off. Lusat. Lusat, right? Lusat, lusat. What do you think we're going to add? Exactly the same sounds we added before. O, osan, right? And this initial form, you just have to memorize. Lusan, right? Lusan. When I'm illustrating this in a class, I'll often ham it up, and with that illustration of people untying their shoes, and then I'll contrast this. And again, this is painting with very broad strokes. These are talking about general patterns, lots of exceptions, but the aorist is frequently used to command a discrete or specific occasion. So I'll be like, all right, guys in class, Jim, come here. Lusan, take your shoes off, like it's a specific occasion. Everybody, we're going to do a learning exercises. Lusata, everybody take your shoes off. Okay, so this one I'd say, if there's anyone who would be my volunteer today, Lusato, let him take his shoes off. I need 3 volunteers. And those people, Lusato-san, let them take their shoes off. Okay, so here we have, again, the aorist active imperative, frequently describing a discrete or specific occasion. Don't forget that you are seeing things that are familiar still, right? So you see the sigma alpha, you're seeing sigmas or sigma alphas. You haven't lost what you've worked for, right? Some things are reappearing. Now in the book, we also deal with the aorist passive imperative that's given and the aorist middle. Maybe I'll just briefly look at the aorist passive. What do you think is going to happen? Same thing where, eluthane, eluthase, eluthe. We're starting with the aorist indicative. Eluthane, the aorist passive indicative. Eluthane, eluthase, eluthe, eluthamen, elutheta, eluthason. Okay, so there we have it. I guess I should draw a little box here. That's disturbing some of you that I didn't do that. Some of you obsessive people here. Okay, so this is the aorist passive indicative. Maybe I should write it down. Maybe the problem is me. You're like, it's not an obsession, Dr. Plummer, to be neat. Well, that's true. So this is the aorist passive indicative. I'm feeling Bob Ross come over me right now. Happy mistakes, right? No mistakes, just happy trees or something like that, right? You can tell I'm a little sleepy. Okay, so what are we going to do here? So we're going to morph this to be the aorist passive imperative. Same sort of thing goes on. We start with the second person plural, but we have to make one more change, right? Because it's aorist, what do we have to do? Yes, we have to cut off that augment because imperatives don't refer to past time. Lutheta. Hey, you guys, be loosed. You guys, all you guys, be loosed. And what do you think we're going to do here? We're going to take that luthate. We're going to put it here. Luthate. So it becomes lutheto, right? Lutheto. Luthetosan. And then this initial form here, you just have to memorize. Okay, the initial second singular form. Lutheti. And these are given in the book as well. So be loosed to his individual. Y'all be loosed. Let him be loosed. Let them be loosed. In this chapter, we also learn that the subjunctive can occasionally be used in an imperative type way. And so if we were looking at this initial present active imperative and we think about our chart, right? What we have missing, we're missing that first person form. We're missing a form here. We're missing a form here. And first person singular really doesn't make sense because if you're commanding yourself, you use this. You go, hey, Plummer, get it together, right? But there is sort of a need for a first person plural form, like let's do this kind of thing. And rather than an imperative, to do that, you use the hortatory subjunctive, okay? You use what's called the hortatory subjunctive. It's the first person plural form of the subjunctive. And so, for example, you're reading along in Greek and you suddenly hit pistu omen in Christo, right? And you might say, oh, there's a lengthened vowel there, but there is no, there's no henna, there's no Hassan, there's no marker of the subjunctive. Nothing has prepared you for the subjunctive. And suddenly you have this lengthened vowel. You're like, what is this? And then you remember, the hortatory subjunctive, right? It's where you exhort a group of people, including yourself, to do something. It's translated, let us, blah, blah, blah. So let us believe in Christ, pistuomen in Christo. Example from 1 John 4:7, let us love one another. Or from Hebrews 4:14, let us hold fast our confession. So, again, how are you going to encounter this? You're reading along. You have a subjunctive form. It's always first person plural. There is no introductory word preparing you for it. And then you say, oh yeah, I'm going to translate this. Let us, blah, 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 blah. So that's kind of like you're finally filling in that first person plural block that we need for the imperative. Okay? The second use of the subjunctive to express command is called the prohibitory subjunctive. I like the way that sounds, don't you? It sounds prohibitory. The prohibitory subjunctive. It's using the subjunctive to prohibit something, to say don't do it. Okay, the normal way that you say don't do something with the imperative, the normal way that you say don't do something is you put may in front of the imperative forms. So look, here's the present active imperative. What if we want to say don't do this? May. Well, don't do this. May. Don't do this. May. Let him not. Let them not, right? We just stick may in front of all those. Or for the present middle passive, may, right? We just, how about for the aorist? We start, may, well, hold on, what's, you're telling me I can't put may in front of the aorist imperative? Yes, that's exactly what I'm telling you. Well, how do you say don't do something in the aorist in Greek? You use may plus the aorist subjunctive. You're like, that's so weird. Why didn't they just use may plus the aorist imperative? They don't. You're like, what if I put may plus the aorist imperative? That would be a grammatical mistake because the Greeks, ancient Greeks, used may plus the aorist subjunctive. And then you just break your pencil in half and throw it down. You're like, dang it, that makes me mad. Well, too bad, right? So again, illustrating this with the present, we give a positive command, loué. We give the negative command, don't loose, right? Loose, don't loose. For the aorist, we give the positive command, looson, but for the negative command, we use may plus the aorist subjunctive. That's the prohibitory subjunctive. If you want to say don't do something in the aorist, you have to use may plus the aorist subjunctive. All right, fun stuff with the imperatives and subjunctives used to communicate commands. Let's talk very briefly about the optative, the final mood we're going to cover in the New Testament. It's an optative. It's a mood that expresses strong desire, wish, even a curse. There are only 68 forms in the entire Greek New Testament. It's a mood that's dropping out of usage in the Koine period. You have over half of those forms if you just learn genoita and aa, right? Genoita is from the verb genomai. You can see both of these are kind of translated the same way. It's building on the second aorist stem, again a main. So genoita is just the second aorist middle optative, right? Second aorist middle optative, third person singular. May it be. You know, Paul says, shall we sin more that grace may abound? May genoita, may it not be, right? This is, Paul especially loves to use this may genoita, may it not be, may it never happen. And then AA basically means almost the same thing, may it be, and it's from the verb ami, and this form here is just a present active optative third singular. One thing you'll notice about the optative is that it frequently has a diphthong with a iota. It'll have an oi, an I. You'll see this as a regular pattern with the optative. You really, if you can recognize these two forms of the optative, great. Yes, I know there's one optative sentence in the homework, but your professor's never going to ask you to do that on a test, or you can always get a little help with the Bible software program. If you can recognize these two forms of the optative, you've got well over half of the optative forms in the New Testament. You're going to be in good shape. Here's some examples of how the optative is used, drawn from the book here. For benedictions or prayers, right, the optative is very liturgical sounding, sort of like, it sounds like maybe how we hear when someone says thee or thou. So from Jude verse 2, May mercy, peace, and love, plethunthea, be multiplied to you, right? And there you can see that diphthong with the iota. Or as a curse, where Jesus spoke to the fig tree in Mark 11, may no one ever eat fruit from you again, that phagoi, you see that diphthong oi there. Or for abhorrence, right? Paul asks a rhetorical question, is the law sin? His response, me genoita, may it never be, may it never happen. So here we are, getting very close to the end of the book. A fun chapter where we learn about imperatives. We learn they're not just commands, but they can express requests. Entreaties, we learn about the optative mood, which is frequently used in wishes and benedictions and prayers and in blessings and expressions of strong desire or dislike. And read the chapter, learn the material well, and then test yourself with the practice exercises.